In 1978, a man convinced 40 people to live in a farmhouse basement, and what happened there was so brutal that even hardened investigators wept in their vehicles afterward. Most people assume cult leaders are obviously unhinged, ranting, eyes wild, impossible to trust. Thériault didn't fit that mold at all. He was articulate, soft-spoken, almost grandfatherly. He quoted scripture with precision. He looked you in the eye. That's precisely why he was so dangerous. The Anthill Kids, that's what he called his followers, began as a small prayer group in Quebec. Thériault claimed direct communication with God, not metaphorical. He said the Almighty whispered instructions into his ear. People believed him. By the early 1980s, he'd assembled nearly 50 people who'd surrendered their paychecks, their families, their autonomy. Now here's where the accepted narrative breaks down. Everyone knows cults use isolation and fear. That's true, but Thériault's real genius, and I use that word with genuine revulsion, was something subtler. He weaponized scripture itself. Every punishment he framed as divine correction. Every act of violence came wrapped in theological justification. I've read testimony from survivors, raw, unfiltered accounts. One woman described watching Thériault order a follower to drink her own urine as purification. Another recounted him breaking a man's fingers one by one, instructing him to offer the pain to Christ. These weren't spontaneous rages. They were choreographed, ritualized, theologically narrated. The basement where they lived was barely heated. Winter temperatures dropped below freezing. People slept on concrete in thin blankets. Children were born there. One infant died of pneumonia while Thériault prayed over it instead of seeking medical help. He called the death God's will. No one contradicted him. Food was rationed. Women were forced to work 16-hour days. Sexual access to female followers was Thériault's prerogative. He called it spiritual guidance. He fathered at least 9 children within the group. None of the men challenged him. Why? Because Thériault had systematized psychological control so completely that resistance felt like heresy. Here's what the initial investigations missed. Thériault wasn't just a despot. He was a theologian of cruelty. He'd spent years studying scripture, finding passages that could justify suffering. Spare the rod, spoil the child. Blessed are those who suffer for righteousness. He'd weaponized these verses in group meetings, forcing followers to debate why their pain was necessary. One man, Gilles Grenier, questioned Thériault's authority once, just once. Thériault ordered the group to beat him, for hours. When Grenier collapsed, Thériault announced that God had spoken through the violence, that Grenier's body was now cleansed. Grenier didn't leave. He stayed another 8 years. The real turning point came in 1989. A young woman named Solange Boilard managed to escape and contact authorities. What she described was so horrific that the investigating officer, I've read his notes, had to step outside multiple times during her testimony. Thériault had performed crude surgeries on followers without anesthesia. He'd amputated fingers. He'd branded people with hot metal. But here's what demolishes the standard cult narrative. Even after arrest, even in custody, followers defended him. Some claimed the escape was a spiritual test. Others insisted authorities were persecuting God's prophet. The psychological grip wasn't just fear of punishment. It was something deeper, a complete inversion of moral reality. Thériault had convinced people that their suffering was redemptive, that pain was love, that obedience was enlightenment. He'd systematically destroyed their capacity to recognize abuse as abuse. Psychologists call this cognitive capture. I call it the inversion of conscience. The trial revealed something else entirely. Thériault hadn't been acting under delusion. His journals showed calculated planning. He documented which followers were most susceptible to manipulation. He'd strategically increased physical punishments in gradual increments, a classic conditioning technique. The madness was methodical. So what's the real explanation? Thériault wasn't a visionary or a lunatic. He was a predator with an exceptional education in theology and psychology. He understood human vulnerability intimately. He weaponized faith itself. He built a system where victims became complicit in their own torture. He was sentenced to life imprisonment in 1993. He died in custody in 2011, but the damage persisted. Survivors spent decades unraveling what had been done to their minds. Some never recovered. Some still defend him. That's the real horror, not that one man was evil, but that he understood how to make goodness itself into a tool of destruction. The Anthill Kids case rewrote how law enforcement understands psychological manipulation. It showed that charisma isn't about volume or visibility. It's about precision. It's about understanding what people need to believe about themselves and systematically destroying that belief until they'll accept anything. We tend to imagine evil as obvious, dramatic, loud, impossible to miss. Thériault teaches us something harder to accept. The most destructive people are often the ones who understand persuasion so completely that they can make victims complicit in their own annihilation. That's the real charisma. That's the real terror. There are dozens of cases like this one, cults operating in plain sight, leaders building empires of suffering through theology and psychology. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. These stories matter because they show us how easily belief becomes bondage, and how the most dangerous prophets are the ones who understand scripture and human nature equally well. Subscribe, there's a new cult investigation every week, and they all start the same way, with someone we thought we could trust.